Chapter 13. Mirrors, Stones, and Trolls. Salazar woke up the next morning feeling like he hadn't slept all. He had a massive headache courtesy of Voldemort's bad mood, and he really wished his heir would stop pouting. It wasn't doing anyone any good. He stumbled around the dorm as he got ready for the day, and decided to go see Poppy before breakfast. He wasn't sure if a headache potion would do him any good, but there was no hurt in finding out. Besides, he had defense class first thing this morning and it was going to be rough. With bleary eyes, he somehow managed to make it to the hospital wing and found Poppy going about her morning routine, but she looked at him closely as he walked over to her. "You look like you haven't slept at all," she observed. "I didn't," he answered, with a slight smile. "I think I'm going to take you up on your offer, though I don't know if it will help in this case." She smiled sympathetically and walked over to the cabinet that held all her potions, and plucked a blue from its resting place. "Bottoms up," he said with a hopeful smile, and drank it one gulp. He knew the potion was supposed to have instant effects, but he waited for a moment and was relieved to note that it did lessen the headache slightly. "It worked, but it's not totally gone. May I have another one? Perhaps the combined effects will get rid of it." "I don't know about that," she said hesitantly. "It's not good to take two headache potions at the same time. I'm sure you know that it could cause worse problems." "It's not going to kill me, Poppy," he said with a tired chuckle. "I realize that, but what if it knocks you out or poisons you? You might not be able to die, but you're not immune to pain, sickness, and other complications. I won't give it to you." "I'm sorry," she said with a firm, yet sympathetic tone. He glared at her, but then he sighed in defeat. "All right. Come see me after lunch. We can try again." Salazar nodded. "Very well. Thank you, Poppy." She nodded, and Salazar headed back out into the corridor. There was still an hour before breakfast, so he decided to return to the spot where he and the others had met Nicholas and Perenelle a few nights before. He wanted a little peace and quiet, not to mention, it would put more distance between himself and Quirrell. There was a special reason why he had chosen that spot, but no one else needed to know that. With a sigh, he glanced around to make sure that the corridor was deserted, then he cast the disillusionment charm on himself and began heading towards the forest. Minerva's eyes flitted around the great hall. Breakfast was almost over, but there was no sign of Salazar anywhere. She had something really important to tell him, and it regarded the stone. Albus had finally put it in place last night. After Quirrell, Voldemort had finally found a troll, so now the final protection was in place. Minerva, however, was not the only person to realize he was missing. "I wonder where Mr. Potter is this morning. He never misses breakfast," Professor Sprout commented. "He came to me early this morning," Poppy answered. "He looked like he hadn't slept all night and said he had a headache, so I gave him a headache potion. He left without saying anything to me about where he was going. He's probably trying to avoid speaking with the headmaster about his little stunt in the common room last night. It wouldn't be the first time a Potter." "Severus, that's enough," Albus said. "If Mr. Potter doesn't show up, I'll go look for him." Severus sneered at him, but he looked at Minerva and Poppy and shook his head in disgust. When Minerva nodded back, he knew she got the message. He hadn't seen Salazar either. "I'm sure the brat is fine. Potter goes missing for one meal and everyone becomes all flustered," Severus said, rolling his eyes. In truth, he really didn't see what the fuss was about. Salazar was capable of taking care of himself after all. However, if his scar was hurting him, it might be a problem, seeing as they didn't know much about it yet. All they knew was that it was a Horcrux and that it hurt when Voldemort was near. "He knows I want to speak with him this morning. I'm sure he will turn up," Albus said confidently. Then, when no one was looking, Albus smiled to himself. He knew exactly where Harry was. I can't. I can't come with you. You were right, and I was foolish. I should have listened to you. Please forgive me. Salazar begged through his tears. He had been on his way to the forest when a noise in an empty classroom on the first floor caught his attention. He went in to investigate and found a large mirror sitting in the back. At first he didn't think anything of it and started to turn away from it, until he caught sight of Gordruk in the mirror. It wasn't only Gordruk though. Helga and Rowena were there as well, and they were all standing around in the clearing in the forest, only the clearing wasn't as empty as it seemed. Their gravestones were in plain view now. That is what Salazar saw as he looked into the mirror of Erist. Gordruk, Helga, and Rowena standing beside their graves in the forest. They were beckoning to him, and trying to get him to join them, but no matter how hard Salazar tried, he couldn't. There was even a gravestone with his name on it, but he couldn't get to them. He clung to mirror and tried to jump in it, but he couldn't. No matter what he tried to do, he couldn't join them. He wondered if it was real, but he didn't dare to hope. All he knew though, was that he wanted to join them. So he kept trying. That's how Albus found him when he walked into the classroom just after lunch. Harry hadn't been seen all morning, and his professors were becoming very worried now. He had placed a few charms on the room so only Harry could find it and so no one else would disturb the boy, so Albus decided to go and get him versus waiting for Harry to show up on his own. When Albus walked in though, he found Harry clinging to the mirror and trying to jump into it. I want to join you. Please just take me with you. Salazar cried, as tears poured down his face. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I do want to die. I want to join you in death. I want to talk to you. I want to see you all face to face. Please. Take me with you. Albus's eyes widened in shock and fright and he ran over to the struggling boy and yanked him away from the mirror. That was not how he expected to find Harry, and the boy's words frightened him. He thought he would just be calmly sitting in front looking at his parents, but clearly he was wrong. Harry. Harry. Albus cried, trying to shake the boy back to his senses. It's just a mirror, Harry. It's all right. Shush now. Albus said, trying to hug the struggling child and bring him to his chest in the hope of calming him down. But Salazar was having none of that. He began to fight Albus, and tried to scramble back to the mirror, but Albus finally had to tie him up in ropes. Then he sat Salazar down in a chair, and didn't release him until he calmed down a little. What is that thing? Salazar asked through gritted teeth as he stood up and brushed off his robes. His head was pounding from the combination of all the crying and carrying on and Voldemort, so needless to say, his patience was about at an end. It's called the Mirror of Erist. It shows the deepest desires of our hearts. Albus explained, as he looked at the shaking boy. You saw your family, didn't you? Salazar felt like hexing the man, but seeing as he was calming down and starting to regain some of his senses back, he decided to play along and see if there was anything he could find out. He nodded. Yes sir, I did. Can everyone see what I saw in it? No. Dumbledore said gently. Everyone sees something different, and if someone had been with you, they couldn't have seen what you saw. Only one person at a time can use the mirror. Salazar let out a breath of relief, but tried to pass it off as still being winded from all of his crying and carrying on. The last thing he needed was a stupid mirror blowing his cover. Oh, Salazar said quietly. Harry, do you really want to die? Salazar sighed. It was time to use some acting skills. I don't know, sir. So far my life has been hell on earth, but I know I am young and still have a life ahead of me. I do want to be with my family though. You're conflicted. Albus stated. Yes, sir. I think so. It is understandable. Tell me, Harry, what do you want out of life? Salazar wondered what kind of question that was, but decided to see where this led. I don't know really, but I know I like to teach. He said, deciding to stick with what he told Blaze a few weeks ago. "I've always liked teaching. Things just come naturally to me, and I like to help people out if they need it," he said with a shrug. "I think that is admirable," Albus said with a smile. "Hold on to that and maybe one day you can be a professor here. Teaching is a very rewarding thing, you know." For the first time ever, Salazar gave Albus a genuine smile. "I like the sound of that. I guess that is something I can look forward to." "Indeed," Albus said, as his eyes twinkled. "You learn at a very remarkable rate, and if you keep going like you are, you will reach your goals, and also, you will have a better life." Salazar nodded, but then he looked at Albus uncertainly. "Sir, I'm sorry about last night. I will be honest with you, Harry. Some of the things you do leave me a little unnerved. Blood magic, using statues to teach manners, and certain things you talk about, such as power, knowledge, and dealing with your enemies. It brings to mind another boy that walked these halls years ago. It didn't turn out too well for him, and I don't want to see you end up like him." Salazar was almost sure he knew who the other boy was and started to ask, but his stomach rumbled loudly. Albus smiled. "Well, we can talk about that another day. You have missed both breakfast and lunch. How are you feeling? Madame Pomfrey mentioned you went to see her this morning." Salazar was shocked to hear how long he had been here, but he tried to not let it show. "Honestly, sir, I feel like I have been run over. I guess all of my carrying on made my headache come back. I'm also real tired because I didn't sleep good last night." "I see. Go and visit Madame Pomfrey then. Tell her I sent you, and that you need to be looked over and fed some lunch. I'll inform your professors that you won't be attending class today. Get some rest." "Yes, sir, and what about the mirror, sir?" Salazar asked, as he looked at it and shivered. He really didn't want a student to find that thing. Who knows what it could do to someone else? Albus looked at him with concern. "Harry, don't worry about the mirror of Erist. It has been known to drive people much older and stronger than you to the brink of insanity. It will be moved to the 3rd floor in a few days, but I ask you to never look for it again. I would hate for you to fall under its spell again," Albus said, with a twinkle in his eye. Salazar wanted to ask the obvious "then what the hell is it doing here in the first place" question, but he decided to just leave it be. Especially before he hexed the man. "I understand, sir," Salazar said, also not missing the slip of its next location. "Very well, Harry. Go visit Madame Pomfrey now. Off you go," Albus said gently, shooing him towards the door. Salazar nodded, stood up slowly, and headed to see Poppy again. Poppy glared at Salazar as he entered the hospital wing for the second time that day, looking bedraggled, but then she sighed, pointed to one of the beds, and went to her potions cabinet. "Let's try a pain potion this time," she said, handing him a yellow potion. "And where in the world have you been?" Salazar drank the potion before he looked at her. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said. Then he shook his head. "This one got rid of everything else, except my scar pain, but I do think Voldemort may have calmed down now. It's only a dull ache and I think I can live with that." "You need rest." "I agree," he answered tiredly, as Poppy steered him to one of the beds. "Minerva has something very important to tell you, but she's in the middle of classes so it will have to wait until later. Do you want to eat, or do you just want to sleep?" "Just sleep for now," he said, as he stepped behind the curtain to change into the hospital clothes she had handed to him. "Will you wake me up in time for dinner though?" "I will, and I'll let the children know how you are doing if they come looking for you." "Thank you," he said gratefully, as he laid down. Poppy checked him over with her wand to make sure he was truly all right, and she smiled when her scans showed nothing out of the ordinary, with the exception of being exhausted. Then she shuffled away quietly when another student came in. "Speaker, if you ever scare me like that again, I will bite you." Nora said as she settled down beside his pillow. You weren't listening to me. I couldn't get your attention, and that scared me. I'm so sorry, my dear. I couldn't help it, he answered sleepily. You must be more careful in the future. I plan on it, he said, as sleep finally engulfed him. So the stone is in place? Salazar asked, as he looked up from his dinner plate. Minerva and Severus had come into the hospital wing after they had finished their own meal, and Minerva looked relieved to finally be able to tell him. Salazar had been awake for about an hour already, though Poppy had to wake him up. She hadn't wanted to, but she knew he needed to eat something. Yes, it was placed last night, but Albus told all of us who are protecting it after lunch this afternoon. So Voldemort knows, Salazar said simply, as he took a bite of his potatoes. Botha and Severus nodded. It's in the last room in the underground chambers. Albus has not said if his protection is in place, or what it is, Severus added. I'll go and get it tonight after curfew. Have the twins track my progress on the map as a precaution, if they can. I have noticed that the map is not anywhere near complete though, so I may disappear and reappear quite often. When I contact James, I will ask how they made the map, and then we can see about truly completing it. The minions will enjoy that, Nora said as she peered at him from the foot of the bed. They like sneaking around. Indeed they do, my dear. Salazar laughed, then repeated what Nora said. If it's all right with you, Poppy, I'll stay here tonight. It will be easier to get around and I won't have to worry about my dorm mates. I'm fine with that, she said with a smile. And I think it's the first time someone volunteered to be here, versus me having to force them. She laughed. I do believe you're right. Minerva chuckled. Salazar also laughed. Tell the twins to give me 1 hour. If I'm not back in this bed in 1 hour, they need to alert you, he said looking towards Minerva. That should give me time to get the stone, put it in the safe place, and get back here. Severus, have an invigorating draft for them in the morning. It's important that they are not tired tomorrow, seeing as we have classes, he said, and Severus nodded. What areas should I tell the Weasleys to focus on? Minerva asked. Tell them the hospital wing, 7th floor, and the grounds by the front gate. I don't think the underground chambers are on the map, he answered, and she nodded in understanding. What happens once the stone is safe? Poppy asked. Then we can relax and have some fun, and I will teach you all how to manipulate an old manipulative Gryffindor, Salazar said with a grin. I'm looking forward to it, Minerva said with a smile. As am I, Severus smirked. Salazar continued to grin at them as his plate disappeared. Things were about to get a lot more interesting at Hogwarts. Shortly after midnight, Salazar cast a disillusionment charm on himself and began making his way up to the 7th floor via a few shortcuts. It only took him about 5 minutes, but he finally found himself standing in a room that, in his opinion, was one of Rowena's greatest accomplishments. The Room of Requirement. He smiled as he glanced around the room. There wasn't anything in it right now, but that was fine. He didn't need much. I need a perfect replica of the Philosopher's Stone, he thought as he stared at the ceiling, and a moment later, a red stone the size of his fist landed with a clunk by his feet. He picked it up, inspected it, and grinned widely. Now, I need a tunnel straight into the last underground chamber. Make the exit of the tunnel invisible to those standing in the underground chamber, but allow me to look out into the room so I can observe the surroundings. It took several minutes, but finally he heard a low rumble off to his right as a plain wooden door appeared. He grinned at the door, and opened it. The tunnel was dark and just big enough for him to fit into, and he needed to use his wand to light his way. Salazar knew this was going to take up much of his hour, but he wasn't prepared for how difficult it was actually going to be. The tunnel needed to snake through the walls of the castle, and at times it became so narrow that he had to turn sideways. At one point he actually had to place the stone in his mouth, set Nora on the floor, and change into his animagus form because the tunnel was so narrow and low to the ground. About 15 minutes later he found himself crouching at the end of the tunnel and observing the last room of the underground chambers. It looked deserted, but if there was one thing Salazar had learned over the years, it was looks can be deceiving. The real stone was laying in the middle of the floor and was wrapped up in a dirty piece of burlap cloth. Glancing around once more, he stuck the very tip of his wand out of the exit. "Hominum revelio," he whispered. He waited a few moments, and was pleased to see that the spell detected no human presence in the room. However, he wasn't done yet. He kept his wand in the same spot and began muttering incantations under his breath, but he frowned at what he found. Which was absolutely nothing. "What is Albus up to?" he thought to himself. "There is no protections around the stone at all. There is no monitoring charms, alert charms, enchantments, or wards. It's just sitting there." Shaking his head in disgust, he cautiously stepped out of the exit and held his breath. When nothing happened, he quickly made his way over to the stone, switched the real one for the fake one, and placed the burlap cloth back in its original position. Then he made his way back into the tunnel, and back towards the room of requirement. Once he was back in the main part of the castle, he began the short trip to the dungeons and towards the entrance to his personal tunnel. Wishing that he had given himself a little bit more time, he began running full speed down the dark slippery tunnel towards the front gates. This took him about 5 minutes, but then he popped out of the large boulder that hid the exit entrance, slipped out the gates, and promptly apparated to his flat in Diagon Alley. Once he was there, he sighed with relief, but then shook his head and laughed. His flat was still a mess from when he blew up his furniture several weeks before, when he had gotten his second wand. He didn't have time to repair everything though, because he was already 5 minutes past his hour, but he did repair his coffee table and place the stone down on it. He would just have to warn Nicholas about the destruction in his letter. After that he apparated back to Hogwarts, and made his way back through his tunnel. He wished he could have taken time to visit Helga, Rowena, and Godric's graves, but he knew that he didn't have the time. He made a promise to himself that he would visit them soon though. It was 1:15 a.m. when he slid into his bed in the hospital wing, and he was thankful that the twins allowed him a few extra minutes before alerting Minerva, because there was no one waiting for him. He slid down into his bed, and promptly fell asleep. It had been a long day. "My old friend. It is done. Your property has been put in the safe place. When you get there, please excuse the destruction. I may have lost my temper a few weeks ago, and well, you know how I can be. I didn't have time to repair all the damage, so I apologize. Your old friend. Me. Hedwig, please take this to my friend," Salazar whispered, as he looked at her hoping she would understand. She hooted knowingly, took a sip of his juice, and flew off. It was Halloween morning and Salazar was in a pretty good mood. It felt like a large weight had been lifted off his shoulders and he smiled as he thought about what to do next. Since the stone was now safe, his attention turned to the next problem. Voldemort. What to do about him? Salazar wasn't exactly sure what to do, other than stand up in the middle of the Great Hall and shout that Voldemort was in the back of Quirrell's head and that Dumbledore had known all along. Which could get a lot of people killed, if Voldemort decided to start casting killing curses in all directions. He knew he had to get the maniac out of the castle though, especially before Voldemort found out the stone was gone. He certainly wasn't going to be happy to find out that it was, and there was no telling what he would do then. For now though, Salazar was content to take a step back and just enjoy the quiet. Voldemort wasn't going to do anything for the time being, because he wouldn't want to jeopardize his chances and risks being exposed, but the problem couldn't be ignored for long. Salazar knew he had to come up with something soon. The morning and afternoon passed fairly quickly, and classes went along as normal. He saw people giving him a few stares, and heard a lot of whispering about him, but he paid it no mind. There was always going to be talk about what happened on this day. A few people even came up and thanked him, and a few more said that they were sorry that Lily and James had died. Salazar took it all in stride and smiled, nodded, and thanked them for remembering the sacrifices that were made that night. He vowed that when all of this was over and Voldemort was gone for good, that he would publicly honor Mitzi and Fripsy, and tell the world what the two elves had done for the wizarding world. Aside from the very few who remembered what happened 10 years ago, the main talk of the day was the feast that was going to be held that night. From what Salazar could gather, it was going to be brilliant. He had no reason to think otherwise though. Halloween at Hogwarts was always something special. As he walked into the Great Hall that evening, Salazar smiled at the sight. The Great Hall was decorated with giant floating pumpkins, live bats were fluttering around the room, and rumor had it that the Hogwarts ghosts were going to be flying in formation and singing them a song. Nora was in awe, and even she commented on what a wonderful job had been done. The feast got underway and everyone was chatting and eating, but about halfway through Quirrell came running into the Great Hall looking terrified about something. Salazar didn't have to wait long to figure out why. Headmaster. Headmaster. Troll. There is a troll in the dungeon. I tried to contain it. Got loose. Couldn't. Quirrell started screaming, but then he fainted. Instant chaos erupted around the Great Hall as students started screaming. Dumbledore had to fire several blasts from his wand to get everyone's attention, but finally some sort of order was restored and the students all turned towards him. All students are to return to your dormitories. Prefects, you are to lead them there. All professors are to follow me to the dungeons. Panic gripped Salazar's insides as everyone made for the doors, and it wasn't until they were halfway to the Slytherin common room that Salazar realized what a stupid mistake this was. If the troll was in the dungeons, then they were heading right towards it. Why in the hell didn't I think of that before we left the Great Hall? He scolded himself. The entire house was in one long line, and Salazar was somewhere in the middle of the line, but as they rounded the corner, they heard a giant roar come from the front, followed by several screams. Go back! Go back! Several prefects screamed as the troll rounded the corner. Students began tripping all over each other in the attempt to get out of its path, and Salazar knew that there was only thing he could do amidst all the confusion. Hogwarts, my dear, now would be a good time to activate Helga's security enchantments. He thought wildly as the troll began to bear down on the children. By the blood of a founder, so shall it be, he whispered, as he cut his hand and smeared the blood on the wall. Every stone in the entire castle turned black as coal and small yellow badgers formed on every wall. The badgers began snarling and moving in the direction of the troll. The troll gave a mighty roar and lifted its club to strike the students in front of it, but it suddenly found itself stuck to the wall as if it were a living decoration. Hundreds and hundreds of yellow badgers poured in from every direction, and the students stood rooted to their spots and stared in horrified awe as the badgers began attacking the troll. Go, go, go. Run back the other way. Get back to the Great Hall. A few of the prefects screamed as blood from the troll started spattering the walls. The entire house turned to run, and they made it back to the Great Hall in record time. Salazar noticed that Quirrell was gone, but that was the least of his worries at the moment. Several students were bleeding, and some had broken wrists and sprained ankles from falling on the ground and being trampled, so someone ran to get help. A first-year girl by the name of Daphne Greengrass had a broken nose, which Salazar quickly healed, followed by several others with small to medium-sized cuts. One prefect realized what he was doing and began helping him, while another began leading the ones with broken bones to another table so they could be treated by Poppy when she arrived. Nearly all the first years were huddled together because they were still shaking from the whole ordeal, but Salazar couldn't really blame them. He walked over to Blaise, who was now sitting with Daphne and two other girls named Pansy Parkinson and Millicent Bulstrode. "Are you all right?" Salazar asked, walking over to the little group. Draco and his lot glared at him, but they seemed fine, so Salazar ignored them. Blaze nodded. Yeah, other than Daphne's nose, I think so. I wonder what happened. Where did all those badgers come from? Salazar shrugged. I don't know. Don't lie, Potter. Not cried loudly with a scowl on his face. You do know. I know you did something. I saw you smear blood on the wall. You also said something just before that. I saw you. You made the badgers show up. Theo, I have no idea what you are talking about, Salazar said calmly as he turned to face the boy. Obviously Hufflepuff had something to do with the badgers. Maybe Professor Sprout did something, or it could have been the castle itself. It's very old. Who knows what kind of enchantments it has? It was you. Not cried, just as Severus, Poppy, Minerva, Albus, and Quirrell rushed in. I know it was you, Potter. I know you made the badgers appear. I saw you. And I'm telling you it had something to do with Hufflepuff, Salazar said, trying to ignore the pain from his scar. Stop lying to me. Not screamed. You whispered something, smeared the blood on the wall, the stones turned black, and the badgers came and killed the troll. I know it was you. He cried, as he jumped up and pointed at him. You preformed blood magic again. And I'm telling you it had something to do with Hufflepuff, Salazar repeated, which was mostly true. Theo, look around you. How many people are bleeding from various cuts and wounds? I was pushed into the wall several times. Yes, my hand is cut, and yes, my blood ended up on the wall. Yes, I was whispering to myself, but how many of us weren't? There was a bloody troll trying to kill us. I'm sure nearly everyone was screaming and whispering to themselves. How many of us were saying, I need to get out of here, ouch, I'm hurt, and Merlin help us? Are you sure you saw what you think you saw? Theo stared at him, swayed slightly on his feet, and opened and closed his mouth several times, but then he sat down heavily and buried his head in his hands. I don't know. I don't know. He mumbled. I think you're in shock and need to be looked over by Madame Pomfrey, Salazar said calmly. I don't need. Severus cleared his throat. As much as it pains me to say this, I agree with Potter. Not, you are in shock. Let Madame Pomfrey take a look at you. Theo looked up at him and sighed. Yes, sir. He mumbled, as he stood up and walked over to where Poppy was healing those with more serious wounds and broken bones. Where did the badgers come from, headmaster? One of the sixth-year prefects asked, and everyone became quiet and looked at him. I do not know. Albus said gravely. This has only happened 3 other times since the founders passed away. No one knows where the badgers come from or how they appear. Perhaps it's something Helga Hufflepuff ensured would happen if the castle and those within it were in great danger, but I cannot say for sure. Salazar stared at Dumbledore with a dumbfounded expression on his face. This has happened before? When? Why? How? WWLI401 didn't appreciate it. Quirrell stuttered as he looked at Albus with a scowl. Severus rolled his eyes. That's because we had to pry you off the wall because you were stuck to it, he said dryly. The only reason Salazar didn't burst out laughing was because his scar exploded in pain, and he gasped and clutched at it, though no one noticed. Well, let it be said that Hogwarts protects her own from danger, Minerva said ominously. Indeed, Albus said with a wide smile. Well, I think that SS sending Slytherin House to their Commonarum was a bit stupid. No offense, headmaster. Quirrell spat. Yes, I agree. I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, and for that I apologize. Thankfully you all are all right, Dumbledore said as he looked around the room. What happened to the troll? A 4th year asked. It seems that the badgers left bits and pieces of it laying all over the corridor, but it has since been cleaned up, Severus said. I suggest that you all head back to the common room. The rest of the feast has been set up there if you are hungry. Those that need to be looked at by Madame Pomfrey stay here, and mind what she tells you to do." Everyone nodded and began shuffling out of the great hall. When they reached the common room, Salazar paid no attention to the food and headed up to the dorm room to change into his night clothes. He had a lot on his mind, so he lay down on his back and stared up at the ceiling, as Nora coiled up on his chest. "Speaker, what do we know about the badgers?" she asked. Salazar sighed and shook his head. "I'm not sure. We all have our different security enchantments, but only the blood of a founder can activate them. It may be possible that over time descendants could activate them, since technically they carry a founder's blood, but I don't know for sure. I know Helga told her children about hers. Rowena didn't have any other children other than Helena, and she died childless. Godric had 2 sons who also would have known, and I told my own children as well." "So you think a descendant of Helga's set the badgers loose those other times?" "It's the only logical conclusion, my dear. I'm the only founder left, and I haven't been back here since Godric died, and he was the last to pass away. Helga died first, then Rowena, and lastly Godric. I was here for the others' funerals as well, but as I said, once Godric passed, I never came back. Until now," Nora said. "Correct," Salazar said as he patted her head. "How did Morty become stuck to the wall?" she asked suddenly. Salazar chuckled. "Well, perhaps because he is dangerous. He didn't get killed by the badgers because he doesn't immediately pose a threat to the students, so that's the only reason he is still alive. I wonder where they found him." "I'm sure Severus will fill us in as soon as he can," Salazar said, as he continued to pat her head. "I see. Very well then," she said, as she slithered off of him and settled down next to his pillow. "I suppose we better get some sleep." "I agree, my dear. It's been a long 2 days." "Yes it has, Speaker, yes it has," Nora mumbled, as she drifted off to sleep. Salazar soon followed behind her.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you guys want to watch more like it, please subscribe to my channel and become part of the video game fanfiction plot. And please leave a comment down below and hit that like button. If you guys have any suggestions on any stories you guys want me to read, don't hesitate. They're always welcome here in the video game fanfic plot. That also goes for video games. Until next time, goodbye!